Some secrets are too heavy to stay buried. What began as a dangerous attraction soon spiraled into an obsession that no one could control. In the shadows of family ties, betrayal whispered, and desire twisted into something far more destructive. This is not just the story of love, it's the tale of how one forbidden bond tore apart everything it touched. Behind closed doors, it started as nothing more than fleeting glances, stolen in silence, lingering just a little too long. The air in the house carried a weight that neither of them could name, but both could feel pressing against their ribs every time their eyes met. It wasn't meant to happen. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. A family tied together by marriage was supposed to embody unity, but instead, it became a breeding ground for unspoken tension and a fire they dared not acknowledge aloud. Madison Carter had always known boundaries, rules, lines never to be crossed, but those rules began to blur the moment she noticed the way her stepbrother looked at her when he thought no one was paying attention. At first, it was subtle small things that could have easily been brushed off as imagination. A quick smile that seemed to last too long, the way his gaze would hold hers in the reflection of a mirror, or how he'd linger in the kitchen late at night, waiting, almost hoping she'd appear to. Madison told herself it was nothing, just coincidence. But the pull between them was undeniable, heavy with something unspoken. Every glance became a question, every silence a secret, every word exchanged a thread weaving them into something dangerous. The walls of their shared home became the silent witnesses to their growing tension. Family dinners turned into an unspoken battlefield of looks and restrained gestures. When others laughed at the table, Madison felt his gaze burning into her, pulling her attention away from the chatter and into a darker place where she felt exposed and complicit. There was a thrill in it, a terrifying rush that made her chest tighten. She hated herself for the way her heart raced when he was near, for how her breath quickened when his shoulder brushed against hers in the narrow hallway. It was wrong. She knew that, but the wrongness only seemed to make it stronger. There were moments when the secret almost slipped, moments that left her trembling in her room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look. Once, when their parents stepped out for the evening, the silence between them had grown so sharp it could have cut through bone. He stood close, too close, his voice lower, softer, almost daring her to respond in kind. Madison's pulse drummed in her ears, and she told herself to step away, to remember the lines that held their fragile family together. Yet, her body betrayed her, refusing to move, frozen in the gravity of his presence. That night, nothing happened, but everything changed. The tension no longer lived in the shadows, it breathed, alive, clawing at both of them, demanding to be fed. Every small interaction became charged, dangerous, a hand brushing past hers when reaching for the same glass, a whisper too close to her ear. Footsteps behind her in the hallway when the house was asleep. It wasn't just attraction, it was a growing obsession, something that seemed to grip them both, binding them in ways that terrified Madison. She caught herself waiting for those moments, the stolen fragments of connection that no one else could see, and each time, she felt herself sink deeper into the darkness they were creating. She tried to resist, tried to bury herself in distraction, school friends, endless scrolling through meaningless conversations, but no matter how far she tried to run, she always ended up back in the same place, under the same roof, with him. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing day, suffocating her with the knowledge of what she felt and the weight of what it could do. Every time she heard his footsteps, her chest tightened. Every time his voice cut through the quiet, her body reacted before her mind could remind her of the rules. It wasn't love, not in the way the world defined it. It was raw, forbidden desire, twisting itself into something darker with each passing glance. And though neither of them said it aloud, the truth lingered in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Madison knew it was wrong, knew it was fragile, knew it could shatter everything their family stood for. Yet she couldn't help but notice how the world felt sharper, more alive, when he was near. The danger wasn't just in what could be seen, but in what remained unseen. The longing in their eyes. When they looked away too quickly, the conversations cut short before anyone could notice. The silence that screamed louder than any words could. Behind closed doors, the line between right and wrong blurred until it was nothing more than a shadow, slipping further into obscurity. And as Madison lay awake at night, her heart heavy with the weight of secrets she couldn't share, she realized that what they had unleashed was no longer something she could control, no longer something she could pretend to ignore. Obsession doesn't arrive all at once, it creeps in slowly, curling itself around every thought until it becomes impossible to separate desire from reality. What began as stolen glances soon shifted into something more consuming. Madison Carter noticed the change first in the way her stepbrother's presence seemed unavoidable. He was always there, watching, waiting, as though every move she made was somehow meant for him. What once felt like coincidence now carried intention. He lingered longer in her space, positioned himself where she couldn't ignore him, and his silence no longer felt passive, it felt like pressure. There was a shift in his eyes, too, one that Madison couldn't unsee. At first, there had been hesitance, restraint, the same fear she felt. But now there was something darker simmering beneath the surface. It was hunger laced with control, a quiet demand that made her pulse quicken even as she wanted to pull away. He knew the effect he had on her, and he was no longer shy about using it. His voice dipped lower when speaking to her, his words carrying undertones only she could understand. A simple question about her day sounded like a test, a subtle probe into her loyalty, her willingness to keep their secret alive. The manipulation was delicate at first, woven into everyday moments. He began predicting her movements, showing up in places she hadn't expected him to be. When she needed help with something, he was already there, waiting to step in. When she wanted solitude, he invaded it, not forcefully, but in a way that made her question whether she even had the right to refuse him. His presence became constant, deliberate, like a shadow she could never escape. He played with the boundaries, not pushing too far, but never letting her forget that those boundaries could be broken at any moment. Madison tried to convince herself it was harmless, that he was simply being protective, maybe even overbearing in a way older siblings sometimes were. But the truth lay in the tension that followed his every gesture. The way he leaned too close when whispering something meant only for her. The way his hand would linger when brushing against hers, long enough to remind her he had no intention of letting go. He was studying her, testing her reactions, pulling at the strings of her silence until she was tangled in his web. Her mind became a battleground. She wanted to resist, to remind herself of the taboo that hung over them, the family that would crumble if their secret ever slipped. Yet his attention was intoxicating, a twisted form of validation that sank into her bones. It felt like he saw her in ways no one else did, like he understood the hidden parts of her she had buried from the world. That illusion of intimacy became a weapon, one he wielded with precision, ensuring she questioned herself more than she questioned him. The manipulation turned subtle acts into traps. If she tried to pull away, he would remind her of what they had already shared, the secrets no one else knew. His words dripped with implication, designed to tether her guilt to him. "You don't want them to know, do you?" he would murmur in a voice that carried no malice, only certainty. It wasn't a threat spoken aloud, but it lived between the lines, reminding her that their silence bound them together more tightly than any blood could. Soon, Madison realized that she wasn't just hiding a secret, she was being kept inside of it. Every attempt to distance herself drew her closer, as though resistance only fueled his persistence. He knew when she avoided him, knew how to make her feel guilty for it, knew how to twist her hesitation into proof of her own desire. It was no longer just about attraction, it was about control, about him shaping the narrative of their connection, until she couldn't tell where her choices ended and his. Influence began. And with every passing day, the line between obsession and manipulation blurred further. Madison could feel it in the way he looked at her, as though she belonged to him, in the way he maneuvered around the family with practiced charm, hiding in plain sight. To everyone else, he was the perfect son, the reliable brother, the figure who held the household together. But behind closed doors, in the silence of their shared secret, he was something else entirely, someone who knew how to twist desire into chains, binding her tighter with every word, every glance, every stolen moment they could never admit to anyone else. The secret they carried was fragile, yet it pulsed with a dangerous life of its own, threatening to bleed into every corner of their family's existence. What had once been stolen glances and manipulative closeness now grew into something undeniable, an affair, hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy. Madison Carter knew it wasn't just a secret between her and her stepbrother anymore. It was a storm gathering strength, waiting for the smallest slip to tear their family apart. The house, once a place of comfort, became a stage where every interaction felt rehearsed, every laugh forced, every meal tense with the weight of what was left unsaid. At the dinner table, she would lower her eyes, pretending to focus on her plate, but she could feel him watching her, his gaze a silent reminder of what they shared when no one else was around. Her parents, oblivious, continued their conversations, but Madison felt her chest tighten with every word, terrified that at any moment someone might notice the truth etched in her silence. It wasn't only her guilt that gnawed at hurt, was the way he thrived in the duality. He could laugh with the family, carry casual conversations, and then, in the same breath, brush his hand against hers beneath the tablecloth, hidden from everyone but her. He seemed to revel in the secrecy, in the thrill of balancing between loyalty to the family and the betrayal simmering beneath it. His ability to switch masks so effortlessly frightened her, yet it also drew her deeper, convincing her that maybe they could keep living in this dangerous balance without being caught. But secrets demand to be noticed, and Madison began to realize that her behavior was shifting in ways others couldn't ignore. She found herself distracted, her focus splintering under the weight of constant deception. Friends asked why she seemed distant. Her mother frowned when she appeared at breakfast with shadows under her eyes. Even her father, normally detached, commented on her restlessness. Every observation felt like a blade pressed to her throat, a reminder that their truth was too loud to remain hidden forever. The stepbrother, however, didn't waver. If anything, he leaned into the danger. He grew bolder, finding ways to claim her in moments that left her trembling. A brush of his hand against the small of her back when he passed her in the hallway. A whisper meant only for her, in a room full of people. He fed on the risk, on the possibility that someone could notice, as if exposure itself made their bond more powerful. It was no longer just about desire, it was about possession, about proving that what they shared couldn't be touched, even by the family they betrayed. Loyalty, once the foundation of their household, began to fracture under the weight of their silence. Madison noticed it in small cracks, first arguments between her parents that seemed to come from nowhere, her mother's sudden suspicions about why Madison avoided certain conversations, her father's sharp glances at the stepbrother, as though he sensed something out of place. The entire family dynamic was shifting, warped by the undercurrent no one dared to name, and Madison knew, deep down, that she was part of the reason it was unraveling. The bond that should have kept them all together was poisoned by the secret she carried. Every lie she told to cover her tracks chipped away at her trustworthiness. Every hidden glance turned love into betrayal. She felt herself pulled in two directions, torn between the family that had raised her and the forbidden bond that made her feel alive in ways she could never admit. It was a battle she could never win, because no matter which side she chose, the destruction was inevitable. Her stepbrother reminded her of this constantly, though not in words. His confidence, his calm demeanor in the face of her unraveling, was proof enough. He had no intention of letting go, no hesitation in choosing what they had over the family that tied them together. And the more Madison resisted, the more he reminded her, through subtle touches, through stolen moments, that the bond they had created was already too deep to sever without consequences. The loyalty that once defined the Carter family was being tested in silence, tested by whispers and touches that no one else could see. Madison could feel the tension building, a storm hidden in the walls of their home, threatening to break wide open at the slightest crack. And when it did, she knew the family she had always depended on would never be the same again. Betrayal has a way of rotting from the inside out, eating through the strongest walls until nothing is left standing. What Madison Carter once thought she could hide in shadows began to seep into the light, and the carefully constructed image of family loyalty started to fracture beyond repair. The bond between her and her stepbrother, already twisted by secrecy and manipulation, had now become a weapon, one that tore at the trust their family had built for years. It started with suspicion. Her mother's questions became sharper, her tone colder, as though she sensed something unspoken in the room. She would glance between Madison and her stepbrother with eyes that searched for cracks, as if instinct warned her of the betrayal lurking beneath their silence. Madison's father, meanwhile, grew distant and harsh, his frustration bleeding into every interaction, though he couldn't name its source. The air in the house thickened, heavy with unspoken accusations, and every smile felt forced. Every word brittled out. Her stepbrother didn't flinch beneath the scrutiny. If anything, he seemed to thrive under it, maintaining the charm that convinced everyone he was untouchable. But Madison wasn't as strong. Her guilt bled into her expression, into the way her hands trembled when her mother pressed too hard, into the way her voice cracked when she tried to cover for moments that had no explanation. Her father noticed, her siblings noticed, and soon, trust began to wither. The betrayal wasn't just about desire anymore, it was about deception. Every lie Madison told became a blade carving deeper into her family's foundation. Where she once shared easy laughter with her parents, there was now distance. Where there once had been comfort, there was suspicion. Her stepbrother's manipulation ensured she felt tethered to him. But in doing so, he had driven a wedge between her and everyone else. The home that had once felt familiar now felt hostile, foreign, dangerous. Arguments erupted more often, sometimes over small things that never would have mattered before. A misplaced look, an unfinished excuse, a moment of silence when an answer should have come quickly. These small cracks grew into rifts. Her mother accused her of lying. Her father's voice turned sharp, full of disappointment he couldn't explain. And though no one could name the truth, everyone felt it pressing down on them, reshaping the family into something fractured. Unrecognizable, Madison found herself caught in a storm of blame, and the betrayal grew heavier with each day she carried it. She couldn't meet her mother's eyes without feeling the sting of shame. She couldn't listen to her father's words without feeling like every syllable was weighted with accusation. She knew they sensed the darkness, even if they couldn't trace its source. It wasn't just the affair that destroyed the trust, it was the silence, the secrets, the way she had chosen to protect something forbidden instead of protecting the family that had given her everything. Her stepbrother, with his calm mask and calculated gestures, reminded her in subtle ways that there was no turning back. "They already doubt you," his tone suggested, without words. "They'll never believe you again." And he was right. Trust, once broken, could never be repaired in the same way. The betrayal had already poisoned the bonds that tied them all together. Even if the truth never came fully to light, the suspicion alone was enough to hollow out the family from within. Every door slammed in anger, every cold silence at the dinner table, every avoided glance became evidence of what they had destroyed. Madison realized, with a heaviness she could hardly bear, that the family she once knew no longer existed. It had been shattered, not by a stranger or an enemy, but by the bond she had chosen, the forbidden connection that had twisted desire into a betrayal so deep it left nothing untouched. Desire, when left unchecked, doesn't simply fade, it festers, transforming into something darker, heavier, more consuming than anything Madison Carter could have imagined. What had once been a forbidden spark now burned like a wildfire, uncontrolled and destructive, swallowing her from the inside out. The longing she carried for her stepbrother was no longer tinged with guilt alone. It had become a force that drowned out reason, twisting her thoughts until the wrongness of it blurred into inevitability. She felt it in the way her body betrayed her when he was near, her pulse quickening before her mind could even catch up. The hunger in his eyes mirrored her own, reflecting back the darkness they had both allowed to grow unchecked. The secrecy that once brought them thrills now felt like chains binding her to him, binding her to the lie, binding her to the shadows where no light could survive. What she once resisted had become what she craved, and that craving was no longer innocent. It was a possession, a claim, a sickness that thrived in silence. Her stepbrother knew it too. His touches became bolder, his whispers darker, weaving themselves into the cracks of her soul. He no longer needed to manipulate with subtlety. The power had already shifted, and she was caught in his orbit, unable to pull away even when she tried. Each stolen moment between them wasn't just an indulgence anymore, it was a surrender. And every surrender left her deeper in the shadows, farther from the girl she once was. There was no balance anymore, no space for love or trust in the family. They had already fractured. All that remained between them was desire sharpened into obsession, obsession darkened into control. She realized that what she felt wasn't liberation but captivity. She wasn't choosing him anymore. She was trapped by him, trapped by herself, trapped by the hunger they had both unleashed. The darkness seeped into her dreams, into the way she saw the world. Once bright places now carried shadows, and once warm connections with family and friends now felt like distant memories she could no longer grasp. Every kiss in the dark, every touch hidden from the world, pulled her deeper into a place where right and wrong no longer existed. All that mattered was the fire between them, a fire that no longer warmed but scorched, leaving only ash behind. And still, despite the destruction, despite the fear, despite the shame that clawed at her chest in quiet moments, Madison couldn't walk away. The desire was too strong, too twisted into the fabric of her being. It had become the very darkness she carried, one that consumed her more each day, until the girl who once knew the meaning of boundaries was nothing more than a shadow of who she had been, bound forever to a bond that promised nothing but ruin. Consequences have a way of arriving long after the choices that caused them, creeping in slowly before crashing down with the force of inevitability. For Madison Carter, the forbidden bond with her stepbrother could never stay hidden forever. And when the darkness finally tore through the fragile walls of secrecy, it left devastation no one could escape. What began as desire, then grew into obsession, betrayal, and manipulation, had now spiraled into something irreversible. The house that once sheltered them turned into a battleground of suspicion, whispers, and silence too loud to ignore. Every glance between them became evidence, every excuse another lie too thin to hold. The family they had fractured finally shattered, not with a single confession, but with the heavy accumulation of truths too obvious to remain buried. Trust, already fragile, collapsed entirely. Her mother's face hardened into something unrecognizable. Her father's voice rose like thunder, and the bond that once defined family was torn apart at the seams. Madison saw it unravel before her eyes. The arguments escalated into nights of screaming, doors slamming, and accusations hurled like weapons. The home was no longer a place of safety. It was a house filled with ghosts of what once was, poisoned by the forbidden bond they had chosen to protect over loyalty. Her stepbrother, who had once thrived on control, could no longer mask the cracks. His calm turned to defiance, his charm to venom, as he realized their secret had not bound them in power, but in destruction. The weight of what they had done spread far beyond the walls of the house. Friendships crumbled, reputations blackened, and the family name, once spoken with pride, became a stain whispered about behind closed doors. Madison herself became both victim and culprit, caught between the hunger she could not deny and the wreckage it had caused. The people she once relied on now looked at her with suspicion, disappointment, even disgust. No apology could repair what had been lost. No silence could erase what had been revealed. The forbidden bond had devoured everything it touched. Where there could have been healing, there was only distance. Where there could have been forgiveness, there was only blame. Madison realized too late that love had never been part of what tied her to him. It was desire twisted into chains, pulling her down until the only thing left was ruin. The family that had once been her anchor was gone, scattered into fragments that could never be pieced together again. And in the end, the secret they once swore to protect didn't just bind them, it destroyed them. The consequences were final, merciless, and inescapable, leaving behind nothing but shadows of what they once were, and a reminder that some bonds, no matter how strong, are never meant to exist.